If you're listening to this right now, chances are you're standing in a moment that feels painfully confusing. A moment where everything inside you is saying something is off, something has shifted, and yet no one around you seems to understand why it hurts the way it does. Your partner hasn't exploded, they haven't cheated, they haven't vanished completely. Instead, they've gone quieter, a little more distant, a little more tense. Conversations feel heavier, pauses last longer, and the warmth you once felt now comes and goes in waves. And everyone, literally everyone, keeps giving you the same advice. This is who they are. They're emotionally unavailable. Stop waiting. Leave. But what if this is the exact moment you're not supposed to leave? What if this is the moment that looks like the end on the outside, but on the inside, something fragile and rare is trying to form? Because there's a specific shift that happens in avoidant partners that almost nobody talks about. And when people see it, they misinterpret it as loss of interest, when in reality it's often the first real sign that attachment has finally been activated. This isn't a loud shift. It doesn't come with romantic speeches or emotional confessions. It comes quietly, awkwardly, and sometimes painfully. And if you don't understand what you're seeing, you'll walk away right as something important is beginning. Most people believe that when someone starts pulling back, it means they care less. That distance equals disinterest. That silence means they're done. But that belief only applies to people who process closeness through expression. Avoidant partners don't work like that. When closeness starts to matter, they don't lean in emotionally. They feel trapped by the intensity of what they're feeling, and their nervous system reacts before their heart can catch up. So, instead of reassurance, you get withdrawal. Instead of clarity, you get confusion. Instead of warmth, you get tension. And from the outside, it feels like rejection, but from the inside, it feels like fear. Fear of losing control, fear of being needed, fear of being seen too deeply. This is the moment most people leave, because it hurts, and because it doesn't feel fair. And honestly, your pain makes sense. Anyone would feel unwanted in this space. Anyone would question their worth. But here's what changes everything. When an avoidant partner shifts from indifference to internal conflict, that's not them detaching, that's them caring more than their emotional system knows how to handle. There's a difference between someone who has emotionally checked out and someone who is emotionally overwhelmed. On the surface, they can look identical. Both may text less. Both may hesitate. Both may seem unsure. But the energy underneath is completely different. Emotional shutdown feels cold, flat, and dismissive. Emotional processing feels tense, conflicted, and inconsistent. One feels like absence, the other feels like friction. And friction only happens when two forces are pushing against each other. When an avoidant partner is emotionally shut down, they don't question themselves, they don't feel torn, they don't feel guilty, they feel relief. But when they're processing attachment, they feel unsettled. They may pull away, then come back. They may act distant, then suddenly check in. They may struggle to explain what's wrong, not because they don't care, but because they don't have language for what's happening inside them. This is the stage where they feel something they spent their whole life avoiding: emotional dependence. And dependence to them feels dangerous. This is the shift people miss. The shift isn't that they suddenly become more affectionate. The shift is that they stop being emotionally smooth. They're no longer calm and detached. They're uncomfortable in their own skin. They hesitate before responding. They overthink simple interactions. They seem conflicted after moments of closeness. That discomfort isn't a sign that the connection is failing. It's a sign that it's reaching a depth they didn't plan for. Avoidant partners are experts at keeping relationships at a safe emotional distance. When that distance collapses, even slightly, their nervous system sounds an alarm. Not because they don't want the connection, but because they don't trust it. Not because they don't value you, but because valuing you gives you the power to hurt them. And that realization shakes them, so they retreat, not to punish you, but to regulate themselves. Imagine living your entire life believing that closeness equals loss. Not needing someone means you'll eventually be abandoned, controlled, or overwhelmed. Then one day, without planning it, you start to feel safe with someone. You start to care, and suddenly, the walls that kept you functional start to feel unstable. That's terrifying. This is why this stage is so confusing. You feel them slipping, and they feel themselves losing control. You interpret the distance as rejection, while they interpret the connection as danger. And in the middle of that misunderstanding, something fragile is happening. They're emotionally awake. For the first time, the connection matters enough to disrupt their internal balance. Here's the part that almost nobody prepares you for. This is the moment they need emotional safety the most, but it's also the moment where they're least capable of asking for it. They don't know how to say, I'm scared because I care. They don't know how to say, I feel myself getting attached and I don't know what to do with that. So instead, they go quiet, they pull back, they create space, and the world tells you that this is your cue to leave. But leaving right here doesn't just end the relationship. It teaches them a lesson their nervous system will remember for years. It teaches them that vulnerability leads to loss, that the moment they feel something real, it disappears. And that lesson doesn't make them healthier, it makes them more avoidant. Stronger walls, faster shutdowns, shorter emotional reach. This doesn't mean you should tolerate being treated poorly. It doesn't mean you should erase yourself or wait forever. But it does mean that this moment deserves clarity, not panic. Because growth for avoidant partners doesn't look like progress in the way people expect. It looks messy. It looks uncomfortable. It looks like emotional growing pains. And most people don't stay long enough to see what comes after this phase. They leave right when the bond starts to matter, right when the avoidant partner is standing at the edge of something they've never fully allowed themselves to feel. If you're feeling confused, exhausted, and emotionally stretched, that doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. This stage is lonely. It feels like loving someone who can't meet you where you are yet. And yet, this is also the only stage where real bonding can begin with an avoidant partner. Before this, the connection was safe because it wasn't too deep. Now it's unsafe because it is. And that danger is emotional intimacy. That's the shift. Not distance, but fear replacing indifference. Not silence, but inner conflict replacing emotional numbness. If you're seeing that, if you feel that tension in the connection, it might not be the end. It might be the moment everything changes, depending on what happens next. And what happens next is the part almost no one talks about, honestly. This is where the connection feels like it's hanging by a thread, where every instinct inside you wants clarity, reassurance, or at least some sign that you're not imagining things. Meanwhile, inside them, something far more intense is unfolding. This stage is terrifying for an avoidant partner, not because they suddenly don't want the relationship, but because they feel it slipping out of the category they can control. Control has always been their safety, independence has always been their shield, and now, without planning to, they're realizing that your presence matters in a way they can't undo. That realization creates panic, not loud panic, quiet panic, the kind that makes them restless, withdrawn, distracted, and emotionally inconsistent. They may replay conversations in their head. They may worry about expectations they assume are coming. They may feel pressure even if you haven't applied any. This fear doesn't come from you asking for more. It comes from them realizing they might want more and not knowing how to survive that feeling. This is the moment when their old coping strategies stop working. Avoidant partners are used to managing closeness by keeping things light, casual, or emotionally distant. But once attachment activates, distance no longer brings relief. It brings anxiety. They pull back, but instead of feeling calm, they feel unsettled. They create space, but instead of freedom, they feel loss. And that internal contradiction is overwhelming. So they may appear colder, when in reality, they're emotionally flooded. They may seem unsure, when in reality, they're fighting themselves. And because they've spent a lifetime suppressing emotional needs, they don't have the tools to process this in a healthy way yet. So they stall, they freeze, they hesitate. And if you don't understand what's happening, it feels like abandonment in slow motion. This is also the stage where many people unintentionally push the avoidant partner back into shutdown, not because they're wrong for wanting reassurance, but because timing matters more than intention here. When fear is high, pressure feels suffocating. When their nervous system is already activated, demands for clarity feel like threats. Even simple questions like, "Where is this going?" can feel like standing at the edge of a cliff. And so the avoidant partner does what they've always done to survive emotional overwhelm. They retreat further, not to punish you, not to manipulate you, but to regulate themselves. And this is where the connection feels the most fragile, because both people are hurting for different reasons at the same time. Here's the part that's difficult to hear, but important to understand. If you leave right here, the story they tell themselves isn't, "I wasn't ready." The story becomes, "Every time I start to care, it ends." And that belief doesn't stay in this relationship. It follows them into every future one. It reinforces the very avoidance that caused the pain in the first place. Their nervous system learns that emotional risk equals loss, and the next time they feel something real, they'll shut it down faster and harder. This is why so many avoidant partners repeat the same cycle for years, even decades. They get close enough to feel something, then something ends, and the wall goes up higher next time. And from the outside, it looks like they never change. But on the inside, they're just accumulating evidence that closeness isn't safe. That doesn't mean you should sacrifice yourself to save them. It means this moment deserves discernment, not flex. There's a big difference between staying present and staying stuck. Staying present means maintaining your emotional integrity while allowing space for growth. Staying stuck means accepting harm, inconsistency, or neglect without accountability. This stage isn't about chasing them or proving your worth. It's about grounded steadiness, predictable energy, emotional consistency without pressure, not disappearing emotionally, but not demanding emotional performance either. This balance is what creates safety, and safety is the only thing that allows an avoidant partner to move through fear instead of retreating into it. One of the clearest signs that this shift is real, and not just empty behavior, is internal conflict. Real growth doesn't look smooth. It looks messy. You may notice them struggling with decisions they used to make easily. You may see guilt surface where there was once emotional detachment. You may feel them wanting closeness and resisting it at the same time. This push and pull is exhausting for you, but it's also evidence that something is changing. Indifference doesn't wrestle with itself. Attachment does. If they truly didn't care, there would be no tension, no confusion, no emotional weight. The presence of that weight tells you the bond is touching something deeper than before. Another sign is subtle bids for connection that don't look like confidence. They may check in without knowing what to say. They may linger longer than necessary. They may open up slightly, then pull back immediately afterward. These moments are often followed by distance, not because they regret the closeness, but because closeness activates vulnerability, and vulnerability feels unsafe. This is where many people mislabel the behavior as breadcrumbing. But breadcrumbing lacks internal struggle. Breadcrumbing is intentional. This is not. This is fear colliding with attachment. You may also notice a shift in honesty. Not perfect honesty. Uncomfortable honesty. Admitting confusion. Admitting uncertainty. Admitting they don't know what they're feeling. For avoidant partners, admitting emotional confusion is huge. It means they can no longer pretend they're unaffected. It means the connection has reached a point where denial doesn't work. And that admission often comes with withdrawal afterward, because saying it out loud makes it real. Real feelings require real decisions, and decisions feel overwhelming when your emotional system has been built around avoidance. The most damaging thing you can do in this phase is label them as incapable of connection and walk away without context. Because while your pain is valid, the timing matters. Growth doesn't happen in a straight line. It happens through discomfort, and this is the discomfort phase. That doesn't mean the outcome is guaranteed. It means the process is active. And there's a huge difference between an avoidant partner who is actively struggling with attachment and one who is passively disengaged. One is at a crossroads, the other has already left emotionally. At the same time, this is where boundaries become essential. Staying doesn't mean tolerating silence without explanation forever. It doesn't mean accepting emotional whiplash without repair. It means observing whether there is accountability beneath the fear. Do they reflect? Do they acknowledge the impact of their distance? Do they show any desire, even clumsily, to understand themselves? If there is zero self-awareness, zero responsibility, and repeated emotional harm with no repair, this isn't growth. This is stagnation, and no amount of patience will change that. But if there is effort, even imperfect effort, this phase can be transformative. This is the only phase where an avoidant partner has the opportunity to rewire their association with closeness. If fear arises and safety remains, something new gets learned. That emotional intensity doesn't always end in loss. That vulnerability doesn't always destroy autonomy. That closeness doesn't always mean being consumed. But that learning can only happen if the environment doesn't collapse the moment fear shows up. That doesn't mean you ignore your own needs. It means you don't confuse fear with rejection, because they are not the same thing.
If you're feeling emotionally drained right now, that matters. Your experience matters. Loving someone through this stage is hard. It requires strength, self-awareness, and boundaries. It requires knowing when to hold steady and when to step back. And most importantly, it requires understanding what you're actually seeing. This shift isn't loud. It doesn't look romantic. It doesn't feel reassuring, but it is meaningful. And if you're in it, you're not crazy for feeling both hope and heartbreak at the same time. That emotional contradiction mirrors exactly what's happening on the other side.
What staying in this moment does not mean needs to be said clearly. Because too many people confuse emotional steadiness with self-erasure. Staying does not mean shrinking yourself to make them comfortable. It does not mean swallowing pain in silence. It does not mean accepting disrespect, chronic neglect, or emotional chaos without repair. And it absolutely does not mean putting your life on hold while someone figures themselves out indefinitely. Staying in this context means not emotionally abandoning the connection the moment fear shows up, while still honoring your own boundaries and worth. There's a massive difference between patience and self-betrayal. And if you don't know where that line is, this phase will drain you. You're allowed to need consistency. You're allowed to name what hurts. You're allowed to ask for accountability. Emotional safety is not one-sided. It's mutual. And the reason staying here can be meaningful is if it doesn't require you to disappear. What this moment actually calls for is grounded energy. Not chasing, not proving, not performing emotional labor to hold the relationship together. Grounded energy is calm, predictable, and emotionally available without being invasive. It's the kind of presence that says, I'm here, but I'm not panicking. Avoidant partners are hypersensitive to emotional intensity. When intensity spikes, their nervous system interprets it as danger. But grounded energy does the opposite. It regulates the space. It creates a rhythm they can trust, not because it demands closeness, but because it doesn't collapse when closeness feels scary. This doesn't mean you suppress your feelings. It means you express them without urgency, without accusation, without emotional volatility. That tone matters more than the words themselves. This is also where many people misunderstand secure behavior. Secure behavior is not cold detachment. It's warm consistency. It's showing up the same way, regardless of emotional weather. It's not withdrawing affection as punishment. It's not escalating conflict to force resolution. It's letting time and safety do the work that pressure never can. For avoidant partners, safety isn't built through words. It's built through experience, through seeing that closeness doesn't automatically lead to control, engulfment, or loss of self. And that lesson can only be learned slowly. This phase is where real bonding can begin, but it's also where it feels the least romantic. There are no grand gestures here, no dramatic declarations, just small moments of trust being tested and sometimes held. This is the stage where attachment shifts from surface level connection to something deeper and more frightening, and that fear is not evidence of incompatibility, it's evidence of emotional investment. Avoidant partners don't fear things that don't matter to them. Fear shows up when something has the power to change them. Inside them, there is often grief they don't know how to name. Grief for the version of themselves that never needed anyone. Grief for the illusion of total independence. Grief for the emotional distance that once kept them safe. Letting someone in means letting go of old defenses, and letting go of defenses feels like loss, even when what's coming next is connection. That internal grief often looks like irritability, withdrawal, or emotional numbness. Not because they don't care, but because caring is costing them something they relied on to survive. That loss deserves compassion, even when it's hard to witness. At the same time, you might feel deeply unloved during this phase, and that feeling is valid. Being close to someone who is emotionally conflicted can feel lonely. You might question whether you matter, whether you're asking for too much, whether you're wasting your time, especially if you're someone who connects through communication and reassurance. This stage can feel like emotional starvation. It's important to acknowledge that pain instead of minimizing it. Love that hurts consistently without repair isn't noble. It's damaging. The reason this phase matters is not because suffering is romantic, but because it's transitional. It's not meant to be permanent, and if it becomes permanent, that's your signal that something isn't moving forward. There is a moment in this process where you have to evaluate reality, not potential. Are you seeing small but genuine movement? Are there attempts, even clumsy ones, to understand themselves? Is there accountability after distance? Even if it's delayed, growth doesn't look perfect, but it does look directional. If everything stays the same for too long, if fear always wins and repair never happens, staying becomes self-abandonment. And that's not what this message is about. This message is about recognizing a pivotal moment, not enduring endless pain in the hope that someone will change. This is also where many people realize that loving an avoidant partner requires a strong relationship with themselves first. You can't pour stability into someone else if you're emotionally dysregulated yourself. You can't create safety if you're constantly questioning your worth. This phase will test your boundaries, your self-trust, and your emotional resilience. It will ask you to be honest about what you can and cannot tolerate. And that honesty is not selfish. It's necessary. What happens if you hold steady here without chasing or disappearing is subtle but powerful. The avoidant partner begins to associate closeness with regulation instead of panic. Their nervous system learns that fear doesn't always lead to loss, that connection doesn't automatically erase autonomy, and over time, that learning softens their defenses. Not overnight, not dramatically, but gradually, the distance shortens. The withdrawal becomes less intense. The emotional returns happen faster. This is how change actually looks. Slow, uneven, human. This phase doesn't guarantee a fairy tale ending, but it does offer something rare, a chance for a different outcome than the one their patterns usually create. And whether that outcome unfolds depends on one thing more than anything else. Whether safety outlasts fear. Not perfection, not constant reassurance, just safety that remains when fear shows up. If fear always leads to abandonment, avoidance gets reinforced. If fear meets steadiness, something new becomes possible. If you're still here, still listening, it's likely because something about this resonates deeply. You're not imagining the shift. You're not weak for caring. And you're not foolish for hoping that something meaningful could grow out of something this uncomfortable. This is the part of the story where most people leave, not because it's wrong to leave, but because they don't understand what they're seeing. And understanding doesn't mean you have to stay at all costs. It means you get to choose with clarity. instead of fear. There comes a point in this journey where honesty has to be louder than hope, because staying only makes sense when it's rooted in reality, not wishful thinking. This is where you need to know when walking away is not abandonment, but